All right. Happy Sunday night, guys. I am so thrilled to be back with you. It's been a couple of weeks since we had Conservatism on tap, and we're getting back into the mold here. And I have never had four folks on this show before. We've done three numerous times, but we've hit a new high in terms of the talent that we have on this show, and I'm so thrilled. So first off, we've got John on the show, my co-creator and a co-host on Conservatism on Tap and the Breaking Conservative. Welcome back, brother. How you doing?
Doing pretty good, Wes. Glad to see you back too.
And what are you drinking?
Right now it's Kraken coffee rum mixed with hot chocolate because it's a snow day in Richmond, Virginia.
Oh, that's
So
wonderful.
I'm keeping warm.
I got some all kinds of mixing tools and everything like that for over Christmas, and I'm just starting to get to use them again. So I'm excited about that, and a lot of them mixed with hot drinks and all that kind of stuff. I got the little foam thing, and it's awesome. So I'm just starting.
Yeah, I was giving out hot chocolate to the kids and stuff, but I had to make sure I knew which ones I was giving out because I had some for the adults, with
Nice.
the rum in it. And so I was just like, yes, you can have that one. And then like, oh, no, you can't have that one. So it was really funny to make
right?
sure.
I think, or maybe.
Yeah. My kid was acting a little weird later on. Yeah, so I'm like, maybe I get the wrong one.
And then I've got Josh on the show, Josh from Saving Elephants podcast, man. I'm always thrilled to have you on the show. I love the work that you're doing. I know you're trying to expand the podcast and all that, getting feedback from it. We've had some amazing guests on there, and I've been a big fan of it for a long time. It's great to see you again, Josh.
Hey, it's good to be here. In fact, it's good to be here with one of my most recent amazing guests.
There you go. Yeah. So we've got Cal Davenport on the show. Cal, I had a chance to be on his podcast as well, so now I get to return the favor.
Awesome.
In the Trenches, amazing work that he's doing there, so definitely check that out. He's going to tell you about it. But I love having this kind of hive mind together of the four of us to being able to do this. So, Cal, since it's your first time on the show, if you want to kind of introduce yourself, talk about the work that you're doing and the guests that you've had on and where it's going, we'd love to hear that, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, In the Trenches is sort of the collaboration of myself and Seth Root, and we just kind of wrote a little bit together on the Resurgent, Eric Erickson's old site, and just kind of jokingly talked about a podcast on putting something together on Facebook, and kind of just had this conversation about, are you serious? And we were both like, yeah, like we want to do this. And what we really wanted to talk about is we felt like meme conservatism, I guess, this sort of like punchline soundbite sort of conservatism just wasn't cutting it. And if I were a young conservative, what would I, coming maybe in college or coming out of college, what would I want to hear about intellectual conservative history?
Yeah.
So we tried to have people who really know the background of that and what they're talking about to kind of have in-depth and deep conversations about those things. So we've had Josh and yourself, Wes, obviously, and just had a great time with a wide variety of people, including guests we never thought we'd get, and just loved to just talk about something that we can't get enough of. So it's kind of a nerd fest for conservative.
It's refreshing. I mean, honestly, it's refreshing, and that's what we do on this show. And why I'm so excited to have you on is, with this show, it's very laid back, and we get a chance to drink and talk about whatever crazy mixology we're doing, but it's a chance to be able to connect some of the practicalities of life and politics and the news to some of the deeper philosophical narratives that were going on. In our last show that we just finished tonight, I had a liberal and a libertarian on, and we were talking about the 1776 Project, which is in the news all the time. We're talking about the 1619 Project, and we were tracing it back to kind of what is truth? How do we determine truth? What is the epistemological foundations of our reality? Like all this deeper stuff that you just don't get, like you said, in the soundbite news. And frankly, you don't get that from many of the conservatives today, is because we're so focused on hating these people. We're so focused on the disease of liberalism in our country that we can't even take time to appreciate the beautiful things in life. And I want to see that come back. I want to see the William Buckley, the Russell Kirk, the Wendell Berry, all, this rich intellectual tradition of conservatism that, much like you just don't get enough of today, and you don't see any like advances made in it too often. And I feel like we can do that together. I feel like out of the work that you guys are doing, the work that we're doing here, we have to associate, like Burke said, we have to get together to be able to make that stronger and faster. So can you tell me a little bit, Cal, about, where do you see your project going in the future? And I want to hear that from Josh too, but starting with you, Cal, like what, if there was something in the next year that you were trying to accomplish, what would that be? Have you thought about that?
So one of the things that we did recently, it must have taken us, I'm trying to think about how long we've had the podcast. It's been almost 2 years, and it took us at least a year and a half to put together a roundtable discussion of ideas. And we have one guest on, Seth and I co-host. So doing something kind of like what we're doing here, getting many people in the room to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And so we started out just doing one-on-one conversations with guests, and now we're really trying to focus on having multiple minds in the room and kind of bring good ideas and good conversation together. So we're looking at doing a journalism podcast about the future of journalism in the future here, and some other topics as well. And that's the one that we're currently working on. But I'd really love to see more larger scale conversations, because you're absolutely right. If we don't have back and forth really, and not just monologues, but dialogues, we're not going to bring together the country. We're not going to have unity. We're not going to have respect for each other. So just kind of emphasizing that and seeing the project go in that direction. That's what I see, at least in the near term.
Yeah. And I think conservatism as a whole, the movement, is kind of in the same spot of like, what's the plan? Like I remember seeing, messages and tweets and posts and stuff from leading conservative thinkers and politicians and congressmen, like, where do we go from here? I don't know. I mean, how do we get to a point where we trust elections again? Can we trust elections again? Like, how do we, ever get to a point where we can, as conservatives be in places of authority and influence and things like that, when we're at this point where we're so fractured, and so angry and so beaten up, and, there's so many different voices out there. Where does Trump go? How is he going to, fit into the future of it? There's all of these questions that we go into this wilderness over the next few years. And that's where new voices like us, can step and say, hey, one of the things that we need to do is to have a stronger philosophical foundation. We need to be able to connect our ideas to something larger than just hating liberals or, whatever the latest right-wing cause, and that's it. So I'm excited to have that conversation. But Josh, tell me about yours as well with Saving Elephants. I know you got a couple new things coming your way, right, in terms of what you're planning?
Yeah, actually, Cal is going to be on the episode to drop on Tuesday, so stay tuned for that. And one of the things we discuss is kind of exactly what you're asking, Wes, and kind of what Cal's alluding to, which is it seems like that's the million-dollar question, right? Where do we go from here? What is conservatism? What does that look like? What is the new fusionism? I think we're right at the precipice of a potentially civil war within the GOP and the conservative movement. Who owns the heart and soul of this, and what does that mean? And Saving Elephants began kind of as a project of trying to, it's a bit punny, but save the Republican Party, save them from a direction I felt was not only a wrong direction to go, but potentially a very suicidal direction for the party to go. And I still believe the GOP is probably the best vehicle for conservatism. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe that's going to change at some point. But I want to be part of the voice that tries to flesh that out. I'm not saying I have the answers, but it's been wonderful to have a tiny platform where I can bring good people together. Some of my best guests are people no one's ever heard of. And that really, I find that encouraging. These voices out there that they don't have a national platform, but people are thinking about this and talking about it. I just want to be part of that conversation.
Well, and one of the things that we do, and John has been a huge, huge part of this, is when I first started our work a couple of years ago, is John knows I love politics. I follow the news every day, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like look at this executive order, this is crazy, or this bill like doesn't stand a chance, but it should. And Jonathan has really helped me with the project. He's like, that's awesome, but there's a whole lot of people who don't follow that, but they are following other things. He's like, are we going to spend any time talking about film or books or anything beyond just, what is being dictated to us by the, the news outlets that be.
Yeah.
And he's helped us expand, now we start to relate conservatism back to whether it's Cobra Kai, you know, on Netflix, or whether it's, you know, talking about the future of Star Wars, or whether it's talking about the great books, you know, in our history, you know, being able to connect conservatism beyond just the very narrow partisan warfare that's happening. That's something that we've tried to do here, John. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, because that's certainly part of our message as well.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely talk about that too. One thing I was certainly wanting to talk about, Wes, was how we got started. You know, Cal, you were talking about how do we relate conservatism to people who are, you know, either graduating college, just coming out of college, being, you know, they're young professionals. Wes and I were there just a few years ago, and debating amongst ourselves, like, where do we go and where do we take that? And of course, this ended up becoming the Burger King Conservative and taking the conversations online. But for a while, we were taking those conversations on the road all around Virginia, and getting, you know, groups. And I think what was important was getting groups of our peers, getting people to, you know, who were the same age as us, and feeling like that we could all be in the same room together, discoursing civilly, but also having you know, a realm of authority to each other. And when, you know, one of us was wrong, it wasn't just, you know, pouring shame on them or anything. It was just the call for more education, for more understanding, for new perspectives. And I think that's kind of what's important, and what I would hope to see for any other, you know, future conservative initiatives, is this call for young minds, for fresh minds, and this empowerment that you probably have something to say. It may not be perfect, but here's a platform to say it. And that's what I would love to see. I think, you know, like Wes was saying, one thing that makes it more comfortable is branching conservatism beyond just the political spectrum, and finding those conservative conservative principles and themes in movies, the shows, the books that you read. Does anybody read books? No, I mean, all, you know, the tweets that you read, right? That's what I mean to say. So, I mean, I think conservatism is everywhere, all around you. And I think that if we make those connections a whole lot more, we begin to see that. I think we've taken it for granted that it's there. And now I think we need to really distinctly call it out and say, whoa, that is a conservative, you know, principle there, that wouldn't exist otherwise. You know, that's what I think.
It's like the Force in the old days, you know, the mystical Yoda Force, as opposed to the, you know, the midichlorians that conservatism.
Oh, I can go on. Like, Star Wars was all about family. It was never about the Force. It was about family. And you know, the new trilogy, it's about the Force.
But, you know, I think about conservatism as a worldview, right? And that's where, you know, that's kind of, I think, what we're discussing is conservatism does have this intellectual tradition, this richness to it that is not talked about, because people are using it as a hammer to be able to attack, you know, the left or whatever. And there's a time and place for that. You know, I argue with Chris on our page all the time, who's a liberal, but there's more to it than that. There's this belief that I conserve things because I see value in the world. I see beauty. I see an inheritance that has been provided to me, you know, that I don't want to waste. You know, I don't want to be. I want to be able to handle that off to my kids. You know, on. So, you know, when you start to see, hey, there are these amazing things in the world that are worth conserving, it makes you a conservative. When you start to approach truth from a humble way, and you say, you know, I've got some strong ideas, I've got some very steadfast beliefs, but I'm willing to listen to the other side, because maybe that can add value, you know, to my perspective. Maybe even if I don't agree with you, I can still understand where you're coming from. And therefore, you know what? I'm going to let you speak, you know, and I'm confident enough in what I believe that you're not going to reduce me to ashes. Like, you can talk because it's okay. You know, like, I'll be able to recover just fine. And I feel like there's this insecurity within the movement today that needs to be overcome, because I don't feel like it's, you know, we should be threatened the way that we are just because, you know, the presidency changed office. But, you know, you would think that the sky is falling and the world is ending. So any thoughts on that, Kyle?
Well, you know, I really actually want to emphasize what John was talking about here, about it's really imperative that we do have these direct conversations, and that we listen, and that we take other people's points of view seriously and understand what they really are, instead of debating a caricature. And it's important that we do that to establish a sort of legitimacy to what we're saying, to allow us to be heard. And we have this particular challenge in conservatism where we lean towards, we like old wisdom. We like we like to defend traditional institutions and traditional sources of authority and things like that. And today, that's sort of it's sort of compared with it's sort of seen as the same thing as just defending elitism to and
Yeah.
these sort of top down modes of knowledge and authority, and that's being rejected in favor of sort of creating our own reality and this revolt sort of from the bottom up. And that sort of approach that is sort of natural to conservatism, it's not going to work. It's not going to persuade people. And it's a challenge that we tend towards that those are our sources of knowledge because conservatism has this rich history.
Yeah.
And what we have to do is find this new way, I think, this new relevant way to communicate these ideas that is authentic to
Yeah.
us as individuals and not just borrowing it from the authority that has existed and been
Oh
passed
man,
down to us. I think that's
that
especially
is so
important.
profound, man. That is so profound because I mean, I immediately went to the Capitol Hill protest when you started saying that because there's this belief within the conservative movement that everything about DC except for Trump himself, everything about DC is terrible, it's awful, it's the deep state, everyone up there is corrupt, no one is good, it's just a complete wasteland of bureaucracy and it needs to burn and Capitol Hill getting the windows smashed in and vandalized and all that stuff. Good. I hope those politicians suffer. I hope they were scared for their life and had anxiety. Right? There's this vengeance and this anger that is directed at these places, and it's practically Marxian. It's practically this Karl Marx of we're the proletariat and we're uniting to be able to fight the bourgeoisie. And we've just shifted it from business to government, right? Like it's very dialectical Hegelian, if you will, in terms of how we're doing that. And what I see, because I'm somebody who I lived in DC for a couple years, waited tables, and I was definitely not part of the elite crowd. I was there like trying to get like $30 in tips, so I could get my cab ride home. I was waiting tables, and eventually I got an unpaid internship on Capitol Hill. And sure, you see some of the bureaucracy, you see some of these like folks who are making tons of money, but that's not what I walked away with. I walked away with an appreciation for the rich history that was there. I was giving tours and stuff on Capitol Hill to constituents for a congressman from Texas and showing them the different statues and showing them how the Capitol was built and rebuilt, talking about the War of 1812, talking about Daniel Webster and Henry Clay and where they used to stand and how they argued vehemently over slavery and how our country used to be so, and it still is, of course, but used to be so volatile during the Civil War days. And, congressmen were, like threatening each other in duels and everything else as we tried to fashion this country that is now the richest and most prosperous in the world. And it gave me that sense of awe and just, wonder at the inheritance that we've been given. And to see so-called conservatives being the ones to smash that, are you freaking kidding me? Like, what?
Right.
We're supposed to be the ones that appreciate the good. They're not trying to destroy it. So, Josh, you might want to take over before I start getting myself.
No, it's all good. We live in a weird era where it's funny, but it's also kind of not funny that it's challenging to convince people who go by the title conservative to behave conservatively.
Exactly. Thank you.
And that's just weird. I mean, it's if we trace this back to, I guess we're all Burkeans here.
Yeah.
Almost a counter revolutionary text, if you will. I mean, Burke said to the French, look, obviously this is my American paraphrasing, but look, I'm not saying you have to fall in love with your monarch. I'm not saying you have to agree with everything they're doing, but somewhere in your history, rather than just focus on tearing these things down, find something you appreciate, something you want to cultivate. And this kind of mindset of let's just get torches and pitchforks and tear the Capitol down brick by brick, somehow that's going to solve anything is not only delusional, it's literally the opposite of how conservatism began.
Right. Well, and that's why we picked Burke, for our channel is Burke had this famous distinction between two revolutions happening in his lifetime, the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And he was like, these are not the same. Thomas Jefferson thought they were. Thomas Paine thought they were. Many Americans thought they were the same. These are our brothers, and if you can read their letters, read their books, watch the HBO series Adams. If you know it, there was this belief that their revolution is our revolution, and then there was other people who said, no, these people are a little bit different than us, and that's what Adams and others brought, to the conversation, is that these folks have a bloodlust. These folks are on the offense. They are trying to murder people in cold blood and guillotines, and they're going not just after government officials of the monarch, they're also going after priests, and religion. And this is very different, and there's an evil here that was not present in the American Revolution, because in our revolution we were on defense. We were trying to protect our God-given rights. We wanted to go our own way, and ultimately, once we did that over the next several decades, we eventually established a relationship, with Great Britain, and John Adams was a part of that. And so there was this virtue, prudence, and fortitude in what we were doing that wasn't shared by the French. But you know what? You go on Charlie Kirk's podcast, and he'll tell you they were the same. He'll tell you that Thomas Paine had it right. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And then all of a sudden, we start seeing that start to infect the conservative movement to the point that, we've got guillotines outside of Capitol Hill today. And I don't think that those folks speak for much of conservatism, but it's certainly an element that's present and needs to be debunked at an intellectual level, obviously at a practical one, too. So in terms of that, like, what do you think, John, are the most effective ways? Obviously, we've got this show, we're having this conversation, but how do we kind of bring more people into the fold, and be able to make a difference?
I mean, I think it really just starts in that interrelational connection that we make with people that we encounter. I mean, if I can speak to my own story, I mean, it's about the people that we met, Wes,
Yeah.
Keenan, Nick, yourself, like all these people that had their own stories. And what I loved is that their stories were not, their story of how they became a conservative.
Yeah.
It wasn't rooted in hate. It wasn't rooted in, oh, I'm an American, and I noticed that these people were so anti-American that it made me so frustrated that I felt like I had to do something. Like, that wasn't their story. It was that they realized that conservatism had such a depth to its worldview and to its perspective on living, and that it was a good way of living. It, the way of living worked, and it worked for them. And it's something they thrived in. And that's something that turned me on to looking into Burke, and realized, of course, if anyone was living a conservative life, like Burke was certainly doing that times 10. And it was a discovery. It was something fresh and something that I didn't know about, especially when I was, a freshman in college, learning about so many other political theorists, and Burke was not even mentioned. So I think that something that, I guess what I'm trying to say is that this very positive testimony that we can share to others about why we are conservative, what makes us a conservative. And it's not, the idea that we have to fight a war against the left and try to win that out, because we've been saying, that kind of language has been going on for almost a decade at least now. And now it's culminated into, this year where we've seen such violence against democracy. So that rhetoric needs to be left behind. If we're going to be moving forward. And I think it's rooted in the stories that we tell to each other, especially about why we are conservative.
Yeah. So, and we got to put our stakes somewhere else, right? Like, to be able to take it out of that. And, there's two words that come to mind in terms of where people get their conservatism today. And it's either out of anger. They're angry at, liberals or younger generations, or, what they see going on in Seattle or whatever it is. There's anger at what the left is doing. And then there is a sense of fear that, the country's going to hell and we'll never be able to get it back. Those are probably the two emotions that I see the most. Maybe there's others. But for you guys, and this is to anybody, who's got a thought on it, but if you were to take the stake out, and it's not completely dismissing those things because there's reasons for them, but if you were to put something else as this is where we're going to plant our flag, this is much more primary than those. What thought, emotion, feeling, what word would you choose instead of fear or anger to say, you know what, this is conservatism for the future. This is conservatism that's, that we need? Anybody feel free to wave at me, like, because I don't know. It's truly an open thought.
Yeah, I think I've got two
Okay.
really. The first one is gratitude. Um, we have to, if we're going to conserve anything, we have to be grateful for it.
Sure.
Um, and these this form of conservatism that we see. You mentioned, like, tuning into Charlie Kirk's show, for example, they're rooted in fear or rooted in anger. This type of conservatism is not sustainable. It's where we slide into these types of behaviors that are not conservative, that throw away our heritage that we're apparently that we claim to be so afraid of losing. But I think that's not enough, and that's why I have a second word or emotion. And I think the other one is humility or modesty, and that plays out in conversations that we have with each other and with the other side. But it's also part of why conservatism isn't just about conserving; it's about reforming. We realize where we went wrong, and that sometimes we need to change things. That something's not working. We're cautious about how we do it. We're careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but sometimes the bathwater also needs to be trained, and sometimes the system isn't working for everybody, and there is reason for anger and fear, and so we have to kind of prudently put aside those emotions and kind of reestablish in sort of a humble way how we're going to move forward that brings everybody into the conversation and just tries to maintain those things that we're grateful for.
Yeah, I mean, if the conservative movement today could be compared to Malcolm X, then we need more Martin Luther King, right? We need people who understand the anger, who understand the injustice, but at the same time, are not going to succumb to the just rage, in senselessness of it, or the fury or the vindictiveness of it, and who, can guide it in a much more sensible fashion. That's exactly what we need. Anybody else? Josh, John, what do you guys think? Do you agree?
Yeah, Cal took probably the best two words I could think of: gratitude and humility. I think that very, very nicely summarizes and describes conservatism. And I would say too that I don't think anger and fear properly understood, maybe concern would be a better word, are inappropriate emotions. I think the question is your political worldview rooted in those emotions?
Good point.
There are certainly times that it's appropriate to be angry and fearful, but if that is your, say, fuel for why you do what you do, why you think what you think, there's something very
That's
wrong.
What made you who you are, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and gratitude and humility are certainly stronger, longer lasting, and healthier things to root your worldview. And the one other word I would say, and I hesitate to even say this because we're so far from it, is love. And I don't mean love in like a Hallmark channel, a bit of woo-woo. It's a genuine depth, to channel G.K. Chesterton. He talked about Rome. He says Rome was great because people loved her. It was not that because she was great, people loved her, but it was great because people. Wait, am I saying that backwards? It's that something becomes great when you love it, and that's what gives you the fuel. That's what gives you the power to have the courage to do what's right, the patience to do what's right, and the gratitude and the humility to do what's right. But you have to love something, not because it's necessarily great, but because you just love it.
Yeah. How about you, John? You agree with those?
Man, that's all pretty deep. I was going to say a well-aged bourbon. No, because I have the cushion of all y'all's terms, I don't feel bad about saying just relationships, the connections that we make. I think that they are becoming increasingly fragile. I think we're becoming increasingly disconnected from not only information that is reliable and how to compare information, but also just, with each other and how to live amongst each other in positive, healthy relationships. I mean, I'm talking about mentorship. I'm talking about good stewardship of family. And I think those are something that I would obviously love to reemphasize in a major way with conservatism and really stake my hold on that.
Yeah, it is wonderful, everything that you guys said. The word that I wrote down was joy, right? as I'm thinking of the conservative leaders, most political leaders, and I can't think of a single one who I could describe as joyful, right? Like, and there have been leaders who were joyful, and not all of them conservative, but you can look back through history and you can see people who didn't have it all figured out, but they knew that they were doing good work, and that was enough. That was enough. And I said this kind of on, we have our podcast every Wednesday, and I said, Reagan has this quote where he says, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction," which is terrifying and scary. But I was like, well, that's possibly true, I guess. But I would also say that freedom is never more than one generation away from revival, right? From being able to be rediscovered. Look what the founders did. And because of that, there's a sense of joy. Is that this is an ongoing struggle. As long as human beings will live, we will always have political disagreements. There will always be people that we say, whether we call them liberals or communists or something, there's always going to be people that you disagree with. Even I had a professor in college who said, even if we took all the liberals, put them on a boat and sent them sailing, we would immediately turn on each other and start calling each other rhinos. Like it's just fundamental to human nature. And so that being the case, right, that there is this struggle within myself as within others, you have to find a pace to it and something beyond that struggle to be able to ground yourself. And for me, that's a sense in the spiritual. That's the things that Russell Kirk talked about, the permanent things, right? T.S. Eliot, is that there is something beneath politics that contextualizes it, that limits it and frames it so that it's not the end all be all, right? And that to me gives me a sense of joy, because I don't do it because America needs to survive for all time, millennia. Like, I don't do it because I think I can punish every single liberal or I can win every election. I don't do it for those reasons. I do it because there's a sense of purpose in the task, and I want to be, helping other folks in doing so. And if we can ground it on that, I think it brings a lot of what you guys are saying, because it requires those things. So all great, thoughts. I appreciate you guys being on it. This is exactly what I was hoping for, is as we bounce these ideas off of each other, as you guys are doing this amazing work, being able to partner with you, to support what you're doing, to be able to find those other people, throughout the world who are doing good conservative work, and be able to promote them and stick together, I think is a ticket towards being able to make a difference. So we'll see where that goes. Josh, with Saving Elephants, best of luck on that. So excited for what you're doing. Cal, it was awesome to have you on the show. Best of luck too with it. It's amazing. So, and then John, I know we're going to be here every Sunday. So as often as you guys want to drop by, you're more than welcome.
Please come in.
For everybody watching, feel free to leave us some comments and emails. I know I'm going to get plenty. So we'll be talking about those on Wednesday on our podcast, but let us know. Don't forget to turn into these guys' shows as they release more episodes, and we will see you next Sunday. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.